Dan Campbell's Fight Club story. How many of you, I'm just curious, how many of you remember the iconic movie, man, The Fight Club? And probably even more so than that, can you remember any of the rules of The Fight Club? How about the first rule? Everybody knows the first rule of The Fight Club, right? The first rule is you don't talk about The Fight Club, but we're going to talk about The Fight Club tonight because it involves Dan Campbell. And I got to tell you, I'm not surprised. When I heard the story last night and shared it this morning on the morning show, I had to highlight it one more time because the second rule of The Fight Club is you don't talk about The Fight Club, but we're going to talk about The Fight Club. Even the third rule is that when someone yells stop or goes limp or taps out, the fight's over, right? How about the fourth rule? Only two guys to a fight. Or how about the fifth rule? And that is only one fight at a time, fellas. Or maybe the sixth rule that the fights are bare knuckle, man, and no shirt, no shoes, no weapons, but all the service in the world from these two hands, right? Fight Club was an iconic movie. Edward Norton, Brad Pitt, and Dan Campbell all starred in that famous movie back in the day. Seventh rule, though, of course, was fights will go on as long as they have to. And see, that's what Dan Campbell was trying to inflict back when this story took place, was got to get something going. And it's going to have to last as long as it needs to make sure that Bill Parcells was able to get what he needed to get out of that practice. And obviously the eighth and final rule is if it's your first time in the Fight Club, you're going to fight. So gotta love the Fight Club, man. I'm going to have to watch that movie tonight. So you guys let me know in the comments below. Have you watched the Fight Club? Do you remember the first rule? Be honest. And if you did or did not listen to the story from this morning, do you have any idea what I'm about to talk about? Because I thought that this was just fantastic. And I also believe, and just like Dan Campbell said, there's some parity here with the Detroit Lions and how he coaches this team. And it's really no surprise that Dan Campbell is one of the first free agents to sign up with Bill Parcells. When Bill Parcells became the coach of the Cowboys in 2003, it was Dan Campbell that quickly became the leader on that team. Even though Jason Witten emerged as the main tight end, the main character there in the tight end room, Dan Campbell still served as a mentor and a key blocker and was involved in that offense. In 2005, this is how tough Dan Campbell is. I mean, the guy is just, he's got steel nuts for balls, right? In 2005, he had an appendectomy on July 27. And 10 days later, he's in practice and then returned to start all 4 preseason games and then 12 games that season, along with Jason Witten. So there's the preface to the story tonight is Bill Parcells, the Dallas Cowboys. It's sometime around 2003 to 5-ish era, and Dan Campbell begins the Fight Club for Bill Parcells. So let's bring it in, shall we? And let's discuss it. And I do have some audio to share with you guys tonight too, of course, which it's electric, man. It's absolutely electric. All right, so there he is, man, the blonde-haired, blue-eyed Dan Campbell, number 86 for the Dallas Cowboys. But Dan's absolutely jacked back then. But Todd Haley, man, he was on a podcast the other day. He was talking about this story of Dan Campbell. Bill Parcells had Dan Campbell start a fight at Cowboys practice. And so let me read this. It says, Detroit Lions head coach Dan Campbell is the man in Motown, but apparently he was previously Bill Parcells' hitman on the Dallas Cowboys back in his days as a tight end. Former Cowboys wide receiver coach Todd Haley, who was with the organization from 04 to 06, so that tells you the timeline, 04 to 06, revealed an amazing story about Parcells and Campbell, who played for the Cowboys from 03 to 05. Well, that narrows it down even more. It's 04, 05. So here's the quote. Practice on a Wednesday was going bad, and you could see Coach Parcells getting heated up. He was not happy with the way, or was not happy with how anything was going. There was no energy. And I see him call Dan over to the side and say a couple of words to him. And Dan runs back in the huddle. And Parcells, with his arms crossed like he always did, walked over to me and said, "Watch this, Todd." A fight ensued the next play, and Dan Campbell was in the middle of it. But you know what? I'm not going to tell you the story. Dan Campbell is going to tell you the story, and I think you guys are going to have some fun with this one. So let's bring in Dan Campbell, man, and this story. It is timeless. Dan Campbell. Here we go.
This is Dan Campbell, our longtime friend from his days with the Aggies and the Cowboys, and we never had you on when you played at Glen Rose, but that's our fault. We probably should have, although I think I was still in college at the time. I have to ask you about a Todd Haley interview he did recently. He was on with Kevin Clark or something, and I was listening, and he dusted off a Dan Campbell story I had never heard, and I don't even know if it's real, but he was talking about you playing for the Cowboys. It was a pretty stale practice. Parcells was unhappy that there was no juice in the practice, probably a Wednesday, I think he said. And Parcells called you over and said something to you, and you went back out there, and on the very next play, you were involved in a fight. And maybe almost like you were a hockey enforcer that had to go out there and change the kind of the tenor of what's going on. And I want to hear that story if it in fact is true.
Classic Dan. This is so Dan. I could see it, and I hope we can find some video of it soon.
Well, it is true.
Yes.
It is true. Now I'm trying to remember.
All right, you guys heard the guy in the background when Dan said, "It is true," and he goes, "Yes," because he's like, "Yeah, man, this is a true story, and I'm going to hear it from the guy." Here we go.
Exactly at what point that was, when it was, because this happened a couple of times. So, one I always tell, I do remember getting into it with Greg Ellis, and it was after Parcells. It was exactly what Todd Haley had said, and basically, Bill just pulls me over. We're all getting back in the huddle, and as the receivers are trying to come back, he grabs me and he said, "You need to shake it up a little bit." And I said, "Well, what do you mean?" He said, "You need to. I need you to start something here." I said, "What do you start? What do you mean? What? Just do something. I don't care. Grab somebody and punch them, push them. I don't care. But we need some energy out of here." So. The guy I'm lined up over is Greg Ellis. So I think, the whistle had blown and, he turned around and I just pushed him, I pushed him in the back and hit him in the back of the head, which Greg's a good friend of mine, man. We competed every day. I love those guys. And so, but I kind of sacrificed it for what Bill wanted. And sure enough, then we get in a big scuffle and the team, we're all out there going at it. But it did. The energy level was raised and we finished with a pretty good practice. So, that was Parcells. He knew what he was doing, man. He always did. Got a lot of respect for Bill, but yeah, he would come to me periodically and tell me to shake things up.
God, you were that guy.
So does that still happen today?
Well, yes and no. I think you got to be careful who you ask to do that. I do think that I know from what I do and with the guys, we're pretty competitive anyway. I allow a lot of things to go on in practice. I don't want to say it's undisciplined. That's not what it is, but it is highly competitive. And, I think the more you can get under a teammate's skin, that makes your practice really good, man. Gets guys going, coaches talking shit. I just think, man, your energy level raises the competition and you got nowhere to hide, and guys can get exposed or they're going to raise their level of play. And so really we kind of get it organically. I don't need to fabricate it.
Yeah. Yeah. That's your teams compete. I mean, you said that on day one. You want to hit in practice. You want to take them out to the deep water, and that it shows on Sunday. That's That's what's great about watching the Lions play is that you're going to know you were in a battle, and that's by design, isn't it?
It is by design, and at the end of the day, this is still a game that's played in pads, and it's a physical game. And you know, if you go away from that and you don't have an identity, you know, that'll always be. I tell the team all the time. I mean, I won't sacrifice anything for our identity. That means more to me than anything, because that's what'll always keep you in games. That's always going to give you a chance to win games, no matter what the circumstances are. So we built that from the ground up, and that's us, man. That's what we do.
So for a moment here, you're thinking, I know you're thinking right now, who's the enforcer? And by the way, this is Greg Ellis. Dan picked a fight with this dude who's just as big, if not bigger, than Dan Campbell. Hilarious. And Dan just tells you the kind of guy Dan is. He doesn't back down from anybody. All right, let's walk all this back. Let's talk about it. So, again, I'm going to go back to the statement I just made. I know you're thinking, like, who's the enforcer for the Lions right now? And I want to break down the statement that Dan said, you have to be careful. And then he also said he's not saying that practices are out of control, but they're highly competitive and, you know, they're getting this stuff organically. You know, we're having these dust-ups and shake-ups organically. So if you go back and look at, I don't know, the last 3 seasons or so, and when we've had some, you know, other teams in the house, you know, Dan is always saying, look, we don't want any fights. If you fight, you're benched, right? But we have to have high energy. And we've seen some dust-ups. We've had some dust-ups in camp. Matter of fact, the Giants come to mind just 2 seasons ago. But it begs the question on who's the enforcer. And I remember Kirby Joseph running down the back of Roma Dunzi. And having, or no, I'm sorry, it was Malik Neighbors, I believe, and just going at it and throwing haymakers at his helmet, right? Is Kirby the enforcer? Is Brian Branch the enforcer? I could see BB being the enforcer. You guys tell me in the comments, who's the number one enforcer on this team right now? I don't care if they're signed in camp or not. Who do you feel is the number one enforcer? Penei Sewell? Could be. Alex Anzalone, Brian Branch, Kirby Joseph, those players all come to mind, right? On the offensive side of the ball, I don't see as many, but I think that those guys would be just as ready to get into it as any of them. Amon-Ra St. Brown doesn't back down from nobody. But why is this important, right? This team, this Detroit Lions team, has taken on the identity of its coach. And Dan Campbell has been the enforcer for the Cowboys, you know, way back when, 20 plus years ago, just trying to get a practice going. And he's brought that mentality to his team to say, look, we're going to practice with high energy. We're going to do things the right way. We're going to get a lot out of this each and every single day, because if we don't, well, then our outcome, you know, what we put into it, we're not going to get anything out, right? The outcome's just going to be terrible. So thinking about all of this and breaking it down when he said, you know, you've got to be careful who you ask to do that. And I said this morning. Imagine for a moment that a rookie, I used Ahmed Hassanin as an example, and Isaac Tesla. Imagine a rookie goes up and starts some crap to get practice going, or just goes and starts some crap anyway, right? The team's probably going to look back and, you know, the leaders on the team like, what are you doing? You know, they're probably going to get all over him. Get on his case later, be like, dude, you can't do that, man. You got to leave that to the vets and the leaders. Conversely, if it was Aiden Hutchinson, you know, that went in to go do that, I don't think anyone would bat an eye or think twice. I think that they would follow their leader, and they would also, you know, follow their leader when it was time to quit. And it was time to pack it up for the day and, you know, shake hands, and it's all bro love at the end of the night. So I think that what Dan is saying there is you have to have the right individual on the team to be your enforcer. And if and when you do need one, that it's important that that person has the respect of the locker room. Not just one side or the other, but the entire locker room. Because if the wrong person does it, it could send the wrong message. So that's what I took from that. But man, I sat back, I listened to this, I don't know, 4 or 5 times today. just laughing the entire time because I can see the whole scenario going through my head, right, with Dan Campbell. And also in part of this this video, which I put the link of Spotify in this morning's live show. Go back and listen to it. It's called The Ticket down in Dallas. It's funny, I did a video a couple of weeks ago about a week and a half ago about Dan Campbell potentially coaching in Dallas. And then this comes out where he goes on a podcast in Dallas saying that he doesn't ever want to leave the Lions. It's a perfect fit. And so Dan must have listened. He must have heard, or someone heard the show. Someone told Dan that I'm thinking he's going to go to Dallas, and he's squashing all those fires right now. So I'm just having a little fun, but somebody heard something somewhere. So anyway, tell me in the comments below, who's the enforcer? And are you surprised that Dan Campbell did this? The Fight Club, man. It's the Dan Campbell Fight Club. It's the Detroit Lions. We're back in the black and blue division, man. It's 2025, and we're going to be going all the way because this team has been built this way. They're built for every scenario. And the way that Dan thinks and the way that he coaches this team, it's this instance right here. It's this thing that Dan went through in coaching, or, learning, playing for Coach Parcells, and then bringing all those, coaching methods with him is why this team is so good. So anyway, I just wanted to share this with you guys tonight. And I'd appreciate it if you guys do me a quick favor, like, share, and subscribe. Especially subscribe, because we're giving away training camp jackets for every 100 subscribers. And it's only new subscribers that are going to be getting these training camp jackets. And then we've got training camp tickets that we're going to be giving away tomorrow. So please make sure that you guys like, share, and subscribe. Be part of the channel. And we'll make sure that we take good care of you on the back end. That's it for this one. Go on, Pride, go Detroit Lions. We'll see you guys in the next one. Take care. Bye-bye.